Without waiting for perfect orders, they moved forward, climbed the cliffs, and attacked German positions from above. Their courage created openings for the Allied forces to continue advancing. At the other beaches, the situation was different. British and Canadian troops managed to capture important positions and push inland. Engineers worked under extreme conditions to clear obstacles and create paths for vehicles and supplies. But victory was not immediate. D-Day was not won in a single moment. It was achieved through thousands of individual acts of determination. Every soldier who moved forward helped create a turning point in history. By the end of the day, the Allies had established a foothold in Normandy. But the battle was far from over. The Germans still controlled strong defensive positions, and the Allies now faced the next challenge: breaking out of the beaches and moving deeper into France. The invasion had begun, but the road to victory would be long, difficult, and filled with more battles. Next chapter: breaking through Normandy, the fight beyond the beaches. Chapter 5. Breaking through Normandy, the fight beyond the beaches. The beaches of Normandy had been captured, but for the Allied forces, the hardest part was still ahead. They had entered France, but they were surrounded by one of the strongest military forces in the world. The German army was still determined to stop the invasion and push the Allies back into the sea. The next phase of the battle would decide whether D-Day became a victory or a disaster. After landing on the beaches, Allied troops began moving inland. Their goal was to capture important towns, destroy German defenses, and create a path for more soldiers and supplies to enter France. But Normandy was not an easy battlefield. The countryside was filled with narrow roads, forests, and fields surrounded by thick bushes, called hedgerows. These natural barriers gave German soldiers perfect positions to hide, observe, and attack. Every field became a potential battlefield. Every road could become an ambush. The Allied soldiers advanced slowly, facing constant resistance from German forces. In the American sector, troops fought through difficult terrain as they tried to expand their control beyond the beaches. In the British and Canadian sectors, soldiers pushed toward key locations while facing strong German counterattacks. The Germans were not defeated yet. They launched powerful attacks to slow the Allied advance. Tanks, artillery, and infantry were used to create defensive lines across Normandy. One of the biggest challenges for the Allies was the German armored divisions. These experienced units had some of the most powerful tanks and trained soldiers in Europe. But the Allies had a major advantage. They had control of the skies. Allied aircraft constantly attacked German supply lines, making it harder for German forces to move troops and equipment. Slowly, the Allies began to gain ground. Every village captured, every road secured, and every defensive position destroyed brought them closer to their ultimate goal: the liberation of France. But the fighting in Normandy would become even more intense. The Germans were preparing their strongest resistance, and ahead was one of the bloodiest battles of the entire campaign. The Allies had survived the beaches. Now they had to survive Normandy itself. Next chapter: the battle for Normandy. The brutal fight against German resistance. The Allies had secured the beaches. They had entered France. But now they faced a new challenge. The German army was preparing to fight back. The open beaches were behind them, but the land ahead was a nightmare of forests, villages, and narrow fields. Every step forward required a fight. Normandy became a battlefield where progress was measured in yards, not miles. The German forces knew the terrain better. They used forests, villages, and defensive positions to slow the Allied advance. For Allied soldiers, every road was dangerous. Every building could hide an enemy. Every movement had to be carefully planned. One of the most difficult problems was the Normandy countryside itself. The fields were divided by thick walls of bushes and trees known as hedgerows. These barriers had existed for centuries, but during the battle, they became natural fortresses. German soldiers could hide behind them, wait for Allied troops to approach, and launch sudden attacks. The Allies had more soldiers, more equipment, and control of the skies. But the Germans had experience and strong defensive positions. The fighting became exhausting. Soldiers moved forward during the day and defended their positions at night. Tanks supported infantry, artillery fired across the battlefield, and aircraft attacked enemy positions. The city of Caen became one of the most important objectives. British and Canadian forces fought a difficult battle to capture it, because controlling Caen would open the way for further advances into France. The Germans refused to give up easily. They sent more troops and launched counterattacks to slow the Allied forces, but the pressure continued to grow. The Allies were bringing more soldiers and supplies into Normandy every day. Their ability to replace losses and maintain the attack became one of their greatest advantages. Slowly, the German defenses began to weaken. The invasion that started on the beaches was turning into a larger campaign to free France. But before the Allies could break out of Normandy, they would have to survive one final struggle. A battle that would trap thousands of German soldiers and change the direction of the entire campaign. The Battle of France, 1940. Chapter 1. The Storm Before the Fall. May 10th, 1940. Europe woke up to a sound it had feared for months. The roar of aircraft engines echoed across the skies. Columns of German tanks rolled toward the borders. Thousands of soldiers crossed into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. It looked like another invasion. But this time, it was only the beginning. The French army was one of the largest military forces on Earth. Together with Britain, they believed they could stop Adolf Hitler's advance. They had powerful tanks, millions of trained soldiers, and the massive Maginot Line, a chain of heavily fortified defenses stretching along France's eastern border. Many believed it was impossible for Germany to break through. Confidence filled the Allied headquarters. But while the Allies focused on defending the obvious route, Hitler had already chosen another path. Deep inside the Ardennes forest, a region many military commanders considered impossible for a large armored army to cross, thousands of German tanks were already moving, quietly, relentlessly. The forest that was supposed to protect France would soon become the doorway to one of the greatest military disasters in modern history. German commanders knew that speed would be their greatest weapon. Every hour mattered, every bridge captured, every road secured, brought them closer to the heart of France. The French High Command still believed the main attack would come from Belgium, but by the time they realized the truth, it would already be too late. Within days, the balance of power in Western Europe would collapse, and the world would witness one of the fastest military victories in history. This is the story of the Battle of France. Chapter 2. Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. As dawn broke on May 10th, 1940, the German war machine was already in motion. This was not the kind of war the world had seen before. There would be no slow advance, no long pauses, no time for the enemy to recover. Instead, Germany unleashed a terrifying new strategy, Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. First came the aircraft. German dive bombers screamed through the sky, striking bridges, railways, communication centers, and military headquarters. Within minutes, entire defensive positions were thrown into chaos. Then came the tanks. Hundreds of armored vehicles raced forward at incredible speed. Behind them followed thousands of infantry soldiers, moving before the enemy could reorganize. The goal was simple: break through one weak point, drive deep behind enemy lines, and surround entire armies before they had a chance to fight back. It was a strategy based on speed, surprise, and relentless pressure. The Allies had prepared for a long war, but Germany was fighting a completely different one. As German forces crossed Belgium and the Netherlands, Allied commanders believed this was the main attack. British and French armies rushed north to stop them, but that was exactly what Germany wanted. While the world's attention focused on Belgium, the real attack was already moving through the Ardennes forest, a place many military experts believed tanks could never cross. They were wrong, and within hours, history would begin to change forever. Chapter 3. Through the Ardennes, Germany's greatest gamble for decades. Military experts had agreed on one thing. The Ardennes forest was impossible for a massive army to cross. Its narrow roads, dense forests, and steep hills made it a natural barrier. The French High Command believed that if Germany attacked here, it would be slow, easy to detect, and easy to stop. But Adolf Hitler had a different plan. He was willing to take a risk that many of his own generals considered too dangerous. More than 1,000 German tanks, tens of thousands of soldiers, and endless columns of trucks entered the Ardennes. The roads became so crowded that the convoy stretched for miles. If Allied aircraft had discovered them, the invasion could have been destroyed before it truly began. But the attack remained hidden. Hour after hour, the German columns pushed deeper through the forest. The French commanders still believed the main battle was taking place in Belgium. They had no idea that the most powerful part of the German army was already moving toward the Meuse River. Then, on May 13, 1940, German forces reached Sedan. Within hours, engineers built crossings under enemy fire. Infantry rushed across the river. Soon after, the tanks followed. The French defensive line began to crack. What had been considered the strongest defense in Western Europe was collapsing far faster than anyone had imagined. The gamble had worked. Germany had broken through the point where the Allies expected them the least. And now, nothing stood between the German panzer divisions and the heart of France. Chapter 4. The race to the English Channel. The breakthrough at Sedan changed everything. The German panzer divisions did not stop. They did not wait for the infantry. They did not pause to celebrate. Their orders were clear. Drive west, drive fast, never lose momentum. Day and night, German tanks pushed deeper into France. Villages fell within hours. Roads became crowded with soldiers, civilians, and refugees trying to escape the advancing front. Entire families abandoned their homes with only what they could carry. The sound of artillery echoed across the countryside. Above them, German aircraft hunted roads, bridges, and military convoys. Confusion spread through the Allied command. French commanders struggled to understand where the main attack was heading. British forces continued fighting in Belgium, unaware that the German armored columns were racing behind them. Every hour, the gap grew wider. Every mile, the trap became tighter. Then, on May 20th, 1940, German troops reached the English Channel near the town of Abbeville. In just 10 days, Germany had cut through northern France and reached the sea. The British Expeditionary Force, along with large French and Belgian armies, were now trapped. Nearly 400,000 Allied soldiers were surrounded. Behind them, the English Channel. In front of them, the German army. There seemed to be no escape. Across Europe, many believed the war in the West was already over. Even inside Britain, fear began to spread. Could the British army survive, or would it be destroyed on the beaches of France? The answer would come from a small coastal town, a place that would soon become one of the most famous names in military history. Dunkirk. Chapter 5. Dunkirk. The miracle that saved an army. By the end of May, 1940. The situation had become desperate. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped along the beaches of Dunkirk. The sea was behind them. The German army was closing in from every direction, and above them, German aircraft circled the sky. For many soldiers, it seemed like the end. Some had no food, others had almost no ammunition. Many had been fighting for days without proper rest. Every explosion brought the enemy closer. Then, Britain made a decision. Instead of surrendering its army, it would attempt one of the most dangerous rescue missions in history. The operation was given a simple name, Operation Dynamo. The plan sounded almost impossible. Rescue hundreds of thousands of soldiers from an open beach, while under constant attack from German aircraft and artillery. The British Royal Navy immediately sent every ship it could spare. But it wasn't enough. So an extraordinary call went out across Britain. Civilian boat owners were asked to help. Fishing boats, pleasure yachts, river boats, merchant vessels, anything that could cross the English Channel, one after another. They sailed toward Dunkirk. These ordinary civilians entered an active war zone, knowing they might never return. As bombs exploded around them, they continued rescuing stranded soldiers from the beaches and shallow waters. Day after day, the evacuation continued. Against all expectations, more and more soldiers escaped. By the end of the operation, more than 338,000 British and French troops had been evacuated across the Channel. They had left behind tanks, vehicles, heavy weapons, and supplies. But they had saved something even more valuable. Their army. Germany had won one of the greatest military victories of the war. Yet Britain had avoided complete disaster. The men rescued from Dunkirk would return to fight again. The Battle of France was almost over. But for Britain, the war was only just beginning. Chapter 6. The Fall of Paris. While the evacuation at Dunkirk was coming to an end, France faced a terrifying reality. Its strongest armies had been defeated. Its allies had withdrawn, and the German war machine was advancing toward the nation's capital. Paris, the city of lights, the heart of France. For centuries, Paris had stood as one of Europe's greatest cities. Now, it stood in the path of one of history's most powerful invasions. The French government knew that defending the city street by street could destroy it completely. Historic buildings, ancient landmarks, and countless civilian lives would all be at risk. A painful decision was made. Paris would be declared an open city. There would be no major battle inside its streets. The goal was simple: save the city, even if it meant losing it. On the morning of June 14th, 1940, German troops entered Paris. There was no massive battle, no final stand, only silence. German soldiers marched through the streets, past famous landmarks, as Nazi flags were raised across the city, for millions watching around the world. The images were almost unbelievable. One of Europe's greatest capitals had fallen across France. Hope began to disappear. Many soldiers continued to fight, but everyone understood the truth. The war was no longer about saving Paris. It was about whether France itself could survive. Within days, the French government asked for an armistice. The campaign that many believed would last for months had been decided in just a few weeks. The Battle of France was coming to its final chapter, and Adolf Hitler was preparing to celebrate the greatest victory of his career. Chapter 7. France surrenders. The armistice of 1940. France had reached its breaking point. For weeks, its armies had fought across fields, forests, rivers, and cities. But the German advance never stopped. Every day, more territory was lost, more soldiers were captured, and more civilians fled their homes. The government realized that continuing the war would only bring more destruction. A painful decision had to be made. France would ask Germany for an armistice, but Adolf Hitler wanted more than a military victory. He wanted revenge. 22 years earlier, at the end of the First World War, Germany had been forced to sign an armistice inside a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne. To Hitler, that moment had become a symbol of Germany's humiliation. Now, history was about to repeat itself. But this time, the roles would be reversed. Hitler ordered the very same railway carriage to be brought back to the exact location. On June 21st, 1940, French representatives arrived. The atmosphere was silent. No speeches, no celebration. Only the sound of history repeating itself. Hitler entered the carriage. He looked around the room, where Germany had once accepted defeat. For a few moments, he stood without speaking. Then, he left. He did not stay to witness the signing. His message was already clear. Germany had erased the humiliation of 1918. The following day, June 22nd, 1940, France officially signed the armistice. The fighting stopped. Germany now controlled northern and western France. The south would be governed by a new French administration. But under German influence, across Europe, the news shocked the world. One of the most powerful nations on earth had fallen in just 6 weeks. Britain now stood alone against Nazi Germany, and Adolf Hitler believed his greatest victory had only strengthened his dream of dominating Europe. But he was about to discover that the war was far from over. Chapter 9. The Legacy of the Battle of France. The Battle of France lasted only 6 weeks, but its impact would shape the course of World War II for years to come. Germany had achieved one of the most remarkable military victories in modern history. Its blitzkrieg strategy had stunned the world. Fast-moving tanks, close air support, and coordinated attacks had overwhelmed an enemy that many believed was stronger. But victory came with a dangerous consequence. Hitler began to believe that the German army could defeat anyone. That confidence would later influence some of the most important decisions of the war. For France, the defeat was devastating. Millions of civilians lived under German occupation. Many accepted the new reality. Others chose a different path. Secret resistance groups began to form across the country. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged German operations, and waited for the day France could be free again. Across the English Channel, Britain stood alone. The evacuation at Dunkirk had saved an army, but not the war. Prime Minister Winston Churchill warned his nation that even greater battles lay ahead. And he was right. The skies above Britain would soon become the next battlefield. The Battle of France had ended, but World War II was only entering its most dangerous chapter. The war would spread across Europe, North Africa, the Soviet Union, and the Pacific. Millions more would lose their lives before peace finally returned. The fall of France was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much larger war, a war that would change the world forever. The Battle of Britain, 1940. Chapter 1. Hitler's next target. France had fallen. Across Europe, the German army stood victorious. For Adolf Hitler, only one major enemy remained: Britain, separated from mainland Europe by the English Channel. It was the last nation standing against Nazi Germany in the West. Hitler believed Britain would now seek peace. After all, France had been defeated in only 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped from Dunkirk. The balance of power had completely changed. But Britain had no intention of surrendering. Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed the nation with a clear message. The war was not over. It was only beginning. For Germany, invading Britain would not be easy. Unlike France, there was no land border. The only way to invade was by crossing the English Channel. But first, Germany needed complete control of the skies, without air superiority. Any invasion fleet would be destroyed before reaching the British coast. Hitler gave the order. The Luftwaffe, Germany's powerful air force, would begin a massive campaign to destroy the Royal Air Force. Airfields, radar stations, aircraft factories. Nothing would be spared. The battle that followed would become the first major campaign fought entirely in the skies. It was not just a battle for Britain. It was a battle that would decide whether Nazi Germany could dominate Europe or face its first major defeat. This is the story of the Battle of Britain. Chapter 2. The Eagle Takes Flight. July 1940. The Battle of France was over. Now, the war moved from the land to the sky. Adolf Hitler had one objective: destroy Britain's air defenses. Without the Royal Air Force, Britain would be helpless. The German invasion plan, known as Operation Sea Lion, depended on one crucial condition. The Luftwaffe had to control the skies. If they failed, the invasion could never begin. Early every morning, the sound of aircraft engines echoed across the English Channel. Hundreds of German bombers, escorted by fast Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter aircraft, crossed towards southern England. Their first targets were Britain's radar stations. These strange towers stretching along the coastline looked harmless, but they were one of Britain's greatest secret weapons. Long before enemy aircraft appeared overhead, the radar system detected them. Within minutes, Royal Air Force pilots were ordered into the air. Again and again, British Spitfires and Hurricanes climbed into the sky. The battles lasted only minutes, but in those few moments, lives were decided. The sky became filled with machine gun fire, smoke, and burning aircraft. Pilots often had only seconds to react. A single mistake could be their last. For weeks, the Luftwaffe continued its attacks. They expected Britain's air force to collapse. Instead, every day, the Royal Air Force returned to fight again. Germany had won on land, but in the skies above Britain, they had met an enemy that refused to break. The battle had only just begun, and soon, the entire world would witness one of the greatest air battles in history. Chapter 3. Britain's Secret Weapon. The German pilots believed they had the advantage. They had more aircraft, more experienced crews, and the confidence of a nation that had already conquered much of Europe. But there was one thing they did not fully understand. Britain could see them. Before they even arrived, hidden along the British coastline stood a chain of tall radar towers. To the enemy, they looked like ordinary steel structures, but inside these stations, powerful radio waves scanned the skies day and night. The moment German aircraft crossed the English Channel, the radar operators detected them within seconds. The information was sent to Fighter Command headquarters. Large maps covered the walls. Colored markers showed the exact direction, the altitude, and the estimated size of every German formation. There was no panic. Every movement was carefully tracked. Air marshals quickly decided which squadrons should take off, and exactly where they should intercept the enemy. This gave Britain a priceless advantage. RAF pilots did not waste fuel searching the skies. They flew directly toward the incoming bombers. Every minute saved meant more pilots in the air, more aircraft ready for the fight, and a greater chance of stopping the attack before it reached British cities. The Luftwaffe had underestimated this system. Again and again, German bombers found British fighters waiting for them. The sky turned into a battlefield. Spitfires dived through the clouds. Hurricanes attacked bomber formations. Machine guns echoed across the sky as aircraft twisted and turned in deadly combat. Some pilots never returned. Others landed with damaged aircraft, only to take off again a few hours later. The battle was becoming a test of endurance. Germany believed Britain would run out of pilots. Britain believed Germany would lose its momentum. Neither side was willing to give up, and with every passing day, the skies above southern England became more dangerous than ever before. The decisive moment of the Battle of Britain was drawing closer. Chapter 4. Eagle Day, Hitler's greatest air assault. August 13th, 1940. The day had arrived. The German High Command believed this would be the turning point of the war. They called it Adler Tag, Eagle Day. It was the largest air assault Britain had ever faced. Before sunrise, German airfields came alive. Hundreds of bombers warmed their engines. Fighter pilots received their final orders. Mechanics rushed from aircraft to aircraft, making last-minute checks. The mission was clear. Destroy the Royal Air Force, destroy its airfields, destroy its radar stations, and open the skies for the invasion of Britain. As the first formations crossed the English Channel, the radar stations detected them almost immediately. Within minutes, the warning spread across Britain. Air raid sirens echoed through towns and villages. RAF pilots ran toward their waiting aircraft. The engines of Spitfires and Hurricanes roared to life, one after another. They climbed into the sky. Soon, the English Channel was filled with aircraft. Bombers flew in tight formations. Fighter escorts surrounded them from every side. High above the clouds, the first shots were fired. Within moments, the sky became a battlefield. Aircraft dived through smoke. Machine guns flashed across the horizon. Some bombers reached their targets. Others were forced to turn back. Many never returned to France. Throughout the day, wave after wave of German aircraft continued their attacks. Airfields were damaged. Radar stations were hit. Pilots on both sides fought until exhaustion. But as night fell, one fact became impossible to ignore. The Royal Air Force was still flying. Britain had survived the first great assault. Hitler had expected a quick victory. Instead, he was facing an enemy that refused to surrender. And the Battle of Britain was only becoming more intense. Chapter 5. The Blitz, London Under Fire, September 7th, 1940. As the sun began to set, the people of London looked toward the sky. In the distance, a low, continuous sound grew louder. Within minutes, the air raid sirens began to scream. Hundreds of German bombers were approaching the city. This was no ordinary attack. Hitler had changed his strategy. Instead of focusing only on military airfields, the Luftwaffe would now strike Britain's cities. The goal was simple: break the spirit of the British people, force the government to surrender, and end the war. As darkness covered London, the first bombs began to fall. Explosions echoed across the city. Buildings collapsed. Railway stations were destroyed. Factories burst into flames. The night sky turned orange as fires spread through entire neighborhoods. Families rushed into underground stations. Children clung to their parents. Rescue workers searched through damaged buildings, hoping to find survivors. Yet even in the middle of destruction, life did not stop. The next morning, many Londoners walked back to work. Shops reopened. Buses returned to the streets. The city refused to surrender. Night after night, the bombers returned. Sometimes hundreds of air had reached a turning point. For months, German bombers had crossed the English Channel almost every day. Thousands of bombs had fallen on British cities. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. But one thing had not changed. Britain was still fighting. Every morning, RAF pilots climbed back into the skies. Many had flown multiple missions the day before. Some returned with damaged aircraft. Others never returned at all. Yet new pilots continued to take their place. The Luftwaffe was beginning to suffer heavy losses. Experienced German pilots were being shot down faster than they could be replaced. Bomber crews faced relentless attacks. Aircraft that had once returned safely now disappeared over the English Channel. Hitler had expected Britain to surrender within weeks. Instead, the campaign had dragged on for months. His invasion plan, Operation Sea Lion, could only succeed if Germany controlled the skies. But that control never came. The Royal Air Force had survived. Britain's radar network remained operational. Its aircraft factories continued producing new fighters, and the British people refused to give up. Finally, Hitler made a difficult decision. The invasion of Britain would be postponed indefinitely. For the first time since the war began, the German war machine had failed to achieve its objective. It was Hitler's first major defeat. The victory gave Britain something priceless: hope. It proved that Nazi Germany was not invincible, and it sent a message across the world. Hitler could be stopped. The Battle of Britain had ended, but the war was far from over. Across Europe, a far greater conflict was already taking shape. Hitler was preparing for his next and most dangerous gamble, an invasion of the Soviet Union, a campaign that would change the course of World War II forever. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. Chapter 1. Hitler breaks the pact. June 22nd, 1941. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the silence along Europe's eastern frontier was shattered. More than 3 million German soldiers, thousands of tanks, and over 2,000 aircraft moved toward the Soviet border. Without a declaration of war, without any final warning, Nazi Germany launched the largest military invasion in human history. The operation carried a single name: Operation Barbarossa. Just 2 years earlier, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact. To the outside world, it appeared that the two powerful nations had agreed to avoid war. But Adolf Hitler had never intended to keep that promise. For years, he believed that Germany's future depended on conquering the vast lands of the Soviet Union. He wanted its farmland, its oil, its factories, and above all, he wanted to destroy the Soviet state before it became even stronger. Confident after his victories in Poland, Norway, France, and much of Western Europe, Hitler believed this campaign would be over within a few months. Many of his generals agreed. They expected the Red Army to collapse before winter arrived, but they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had fought before, an enemy with endless territory, millions of soldiers, and a determination that would surprise the entire world. As the first artillery shells exploded across the border, World War II entered a new and far more brutal chapter. The battle for the East had begun, and it would become the deadliest campaign in human history. Chapter 2. The Three Army Groups, Operation Barbarossa, was unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. This was not a single attack. It was 3 massive invasions, launched at the same time. Hitler divided his forces into 3 powerful army groups. Each had a different mission. Each had a different destination. Army Group North would advance toward Leningrad, a city rich in history, and one of the Soviet Union's most important industrial centers. Its capture would isolate the Baltic region and deliver a devastating psychological blow. Army Group Center, the strongest of the 3, would drive straight toward Moscow, the Soviet capital, the political heart of the nation. Many German generals believed that if Moscow fell, the Soviet Union would collapse, but Hitler had other ideas. To the south, Army Group South was ordered to seize Ukraine. Its vast wheat fields, coal mines, and industrial cities were considered essential for Germany's war effort. At dawn, the attack began across a front stretching nearly 3,000 kilometers. German artillery opened fire. Fighter aircraft struck Soviet airfields. Hundreds of Soviet planes were destroyed before they could even take off. Then came the Panzer divisions, fast, relentless, and deadly. They smashed through the border defenses, surrounding entire Soviet armies. Thousands of Red Army soldiers found themselves trapped. Communication collapsed. Many commanders had no idea what was happening. Some Soviet units continued fighting bravely. Others were overwhelmed before they could organize a defense. Within days, Germany had advanced farther than anyone thought possible. Entire towns fell, bridges were captured, and the road into the Soviet Union lay open. To many observers, it looked like another blitzkrieg victory, another nation, about to fall before Hitler's unstoppable war machine. But beyond those endless forests and open plains, a different kind of war was waiting, a war that Germany had never experienced before. Chapter 3: Stalin's Shock. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union was under attack. Reports arrived from every direction. Border outposts had fallen, airfields were burning, entire divisions had gone silent. But inside the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin refused to believe the truth. For months, intelligence officers had warned that Germany was preparing for an invasion. British intelligence had issued similar warnings. Even German deserters had reported that an attack was coming. Yet Stalin believed Hitler would not risk fighting a war on two fronts. He thought Germany would finish Britain first. He was wrong. By the time the scale of the invasion became clear, it was already too late. German bombers had destroyed hundreds of Soviet aircraft on the ground. Communication lines were cut. Railways were under attack. Entire Soviet armies were being surrounded. Across the western frontier, thousands of Red Army soldiers fought desperately. Some resisted until their ammunition was gone. Others found themselves completely isolated, with no orders, no reinforcements, and no way to escape. Panic spread through the Soviet command. For several days, no one knew how far the German advance would go. Cities that had been considered safe were suddenly on the front line. Roads filled with civilians trying to escape eastward. Families abandoned their homes, carrying only what they could hold in their hands. Factories rushed to dismantle their machinery. Trains loaded with workers and equipment began moving deeper into the Soviet Union. Everything that could help the war effort had to be saved before the Germans arrived. Despite the chaos, the Soviet Union refused to surrender. New armies were formed. Factories worked day and night. Millions of civilians volunteered to help build defensive lines. The first weeks of the invasion belonged to Germany, but the Soviet Union was preparing for a long war. A war that would demand unimaginable sacrifice. A war that would decide the future of Europe. Chapter 4: The Road to Moscow. Summer of 1941. The German advance continued across the Soviet Union. After the first weeks of the invasion, the Red Army was in chaos. German panzer divisions moved forward at incredible speed. They surrounded Soviet forces, captured important cities, and pushed deeper into enemy territory. To many German commanders, the victory seemed close. The road to Moscow was open. The Soviet capital was more than just a city. It was the center of Soviet power. Its capture could damage the morale of the entire nation. Hitler believed that taking Moscow would bring the Soviet Union to its knees. So, Army Group Center began its advance toward the capital. But the further the Germans moved, the more difficult the war became. The Soviet Union was enormous. Distances that looked small on maps became endless journeys on the battlefield. German supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers behind them. Fuel became harder to deliver. Vehicles broke down, soldiers became exhausted, and still, the Red Army continued fighting. Every village, every road, every river crossing became a new battlefield. In September 1941, Germany launched a massive operation to surround Soviet forces near Kiev. It became one of the largest encirclement battles in history. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured. Germany had achieved another major victory, but every victory was costing more time, and time was becoming Germany's greatest enemy. As autumn arrived, the weather began to change. Rain turned roads into deep mud. German vehicles struggled to move. The soldiers who had expected a quick campaign now faced a war that was becoming longer and harder every day. Ahead of them stood Moscow, But between Germany and victory was the Russian winter, and one of the most difficult battles of World War II was about to begin. June 6, 1944. Before the sun rose over the coast of Normandy, thousands of Allied soldiers waited in complete silence aboard ships crossing the English Channel. They knew that within hours many of them would never return home. This was Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history.